Yes, sir. Okay. First episode, last call. Here, my boy Riley Stapleton. It's a long time coming, my brother. I feel like talking about this for over a year, right?
Yeah, we're finally here. We're starting this the little thing we're calling last call. We're just gonna be talking about SEC football. We're aiming to have maybe weekly things talking about some previews, and then on Saturdays hopefully some recaps of what's been going on in the SEC.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
so yeah,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just like Riley said, man, we're really just striving to bring you guys the top notch SEC news coverage. We're both go to the University of Missouri Columbia, so we're pretty tapped in with SEC football coverage and what's going across the conference. And it's our goal to make sure you guys are updated a couple times of the week on what's going on. But start the episode today. We're just going to talk about some of the SEC games being postponed and impacted. And first up, I think this game was kind of detrimental for the SEC for it to be postponed was the postponed game of Alabama LSU. I think this, in my opinion, was detrimental for the SEC strictly because normally the game between Alabama and LSU is one of the biggest games, if not the biggest game for the SEC every year, which is shown on CBS. And each year, LSU and Alabama have one of the top teams, not the top team in the country. From my perspective, even though LSU is having a down year this year, recently their quarterback Miles Brennan being out for the rest of the year, them losing to teams like Mississippi State and Missouri, still not having that matchup versus Alabama on prime time on CBS, I think is hard for the SEC as a whole. And what do you think about that, Riley?
I think the biggest loser here is definitely just the conference and the fans missing out on a classic game, but I think LSU is kind of avoiding another embarrassment. They've just kind of
Yeah,
looked lost this year. Alabama looks like they could probably win the whole thing. So I think, maybe getting a break. I mean, I don't know if it's going to help at this point. I think they're kind of just ready for this season to be over. But I think it hurts Alabama a little bit, maybe just from a momentum standpoint.
right,
But I think the talent on the roster is still always going to be there. So I think they'll be fine. But
right,
like I said, I think the biggest loser is definitely just the viewers in the conference losing money from
right.
not having a game on TV, no one watching it.
Right, right. The biggest loser definitely is the SEC, and it is maybe a good moment for LSU to not necessarily play this game because, like I said, they've had an embarrassing year all year, losing to Missouri the way they lost to them, and then they just come off a week where they lost 48-11 against Auburn. Their quarterback Miles Brennan, as we said earlier, is out for the rest of the year. But I guess the silver lining for LSU as far as not playing Alabama. LSU and Alabama are bringing in a top 5 recruiting classes right now, projected, and they tend to compete for the same pool of talent, for the same pool of 5 stars every year. So it probably is a good thing that LSU isn't going to lose to Alabama by 40 to 50 points when they're both trying to go after a 5-star running back or a 5-star tight end per se. But the next game that was postponed was Texas A&M versus Tennessee. I think Texas A&M, as far as the individual team that's going to suffer the most from the postpone in this conference, is Texas A&M. They're 5-1. They're currently ranked 5th in the country. The only loss on the season came in an embarrassment fashion, but to the number 1 ranked team, Alabama, in week 2, 52-24. Fortunately for Texas A&M, they bounced back week 3, beating Florida 41-38, and been riding on a 4-game winning streak. So I think the postponed game versus Tennessee really kind of just stops their momentum, and also it kind of just stops their pathway into the top 4. So right now, Texas A&M currently, for them to get into the playoff, if they wanted to make the playoff, is they have to have Clemson lose once again, Notre Dame to lose like 2 more times, and then the Alabama lose 2 more times. So there's really a very, very slim chance from the get-go for Texas A&M to get inside of the playoff. But even with games like this to prove that they're top 14 to lose, the opportunity has to hurt. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say that out of all these postponements, A&M is probably the biggest loser. Just it's definitely, I think it's a momentum killer. I mean, we saw Florida not play for like 3 weeks, and they came out firing and beat Missouri and Georgia back to back. So it might not be the worst thing, but I mean, the SEC is typically a conference, maybe not this year, but a conference where it's hard to consistently put up a ton of points, and they're going from 41 on Florida, 28 on Mississippi State, 42 on Arkansas, 48 on South Carolina. So, I mean, I think if you build any kind of offensive momentum in this conference, you always want to keep it going. But luckily, when they return to action, it'll be against Ole Miss, and I think that's a team that they can probably beat pretty good. But Ole Miss did give Alabama a run for their money, so you never know. But at least now, I think it'll be harder for them to overlook Ole Miss, having 2 weeks to prepare for them. I don't think you're going to sleep on them, think it's a cakewalk and then be surprised like has happened in the past. So, I mean, I think there's definitely positives and negatives to this. But as far as momentum, I think this could really spark a few problems for A&M.
Yep, and then this is a game that I definitely would have them winning. Tennessee losing to Arkansas last week, and we're gonna talk about Arkansas a little bit later on the show. But they're starting up 13. You started the game against Arkansas 13-0, ended up losing that game 24-13. Tennessee struggled in the third quarter. Only had 16 yards total last week in the third quarter. They only managed to gain 5 first downs in the third quarters in the last 4 games combined. So this is definitely a game that you would have probably seen Texas A&M shine in, maybe win about 40 to 50 points, help show Kellen Mond and some of the young talent that they have on that roster and the improved defense that has happened over weeks. So Texas A&M is definitely hurt by that loss. But we're going to just quickly move on to the next postponed game, and that was Auburn versus Mississippi State. Auburn necessarily doesn't have any playoff chances at all, sitting currently at 4-2. They've already lost to Georgia and South Carolina. My question to you, kind of off the radar right now, are you sold on Bo Nix, and how do you feel about him, as far as, I guess, the Auburn in their future going to next year?
I would say no, I'm not sold on him. Not 100%. The inconsistency there is definitely a concern for me. But when you look at this conference this year, Kellen Mond has been great. Mac Jones is going off. Kyle Trask looks great. I mean, there's so many great passers. We've even here at Mizzou, we've seen Connor Bazelak look like he could be the future of the conference. Absolutely. And then Bo Nix is sitting here 6 games in with 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. His completion percentage, he's barely hanging on to 60. I think if Bo Nix was, the caliber of a guy that we could really be sold on, that Auburn would be ranked a little higher right now. I think offensively he is one of the bigger things holding them back. I mean, some days he's great, some days he's the reason they lose. The inconsistency there, I'm not sold on him.
Yep, and as starter quarterback in the SEC, and specifically the SEC West, you can't be inconsistent. I mean, really, to win a division like this and to win a conference and to win a national championship, you have to be a great college football quarterback, if not really a top 10 caliber talent, in my opinion. You look at Tua, he was in, what was it like that? Was it 6th overall pick, 5th overall pick by the Dolphins, something like that. And you see he still wasn't able to win a national championship some years. So you really have to be a top-notch quarterback to win the SEC West, and the way Bo Nix is kind of slightly above average, if not average. And him coming out and being the number 1 dual threat quarterback coming out of the 2019 class, there's a lot of high expectations for him, and he kind of really hasn't lived up to that hype. Only 60% completion percentage, 9 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, kind of like I guess good enough. But when we talk about Auburn, it has to be a little bit better. But for the last game that got postponed, we talk about quickly is our home team, Missouri versus Georgia. Georgia coming in at number 5. Georgia number 5.
They're number 12 now.
12. They dropped down. I'm sorry, number 12. So Georgia really, with the loss last week, they were ranked number 5, but them dropping down number 12 really doesn't have any playoff chances really anymore. Their quarterback is being evaluated. He got banged up in their last game. They played a very physical game versus Florida last year. A lot of injuries in that game. I think this loser for this game is probably Missouri. I think Missouri, with their having a younger quarterback and Bazelak, a lot of young talent for us. I think even though we won't win this game, I think it's good for our roster to get as much playing time as possible. Guys like Devin Nicholson, the other starting linebacker, to play as many reps as possible, because we got guys like Nick Bolton, who's arguably one of the best linebackers in the country, leaving after the season. I think it's an opportunity for the younger guys to get more reps heading into next year from Mizzou.
Yeah, I think maybe from an experience standpoint, this isn't exactly what you want. I think playing Georgia, especially having a lot of young guys on offense, including Bazelak, when you play against Georgia, you're going to play against a tough defense, and you're probably going to learn a lot. But so from the experience standpoint, it might hurt not being able to play this game. But I think from a mentality standpoint, you just got crushed by Florida. You probably don't want to turn around and go get crushed by Georgia right after that. That could. Because, the last 4 games of the season are definitely winnable. And I think if, you get blown out back-to-back, he might not be in the right mental state. Now,
Right.
we can push this game to maybe December 19th, unless Georgia ends up in the SEC championship. We might not play him at all. And we can just
Right.
focus on that South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt run and try to win out. I think that's what will be best for Missouri. I think Georgia definitely needed the break. They still need to figure out the quarterback situation. Stetson Bennett dealing with injuries in that last game. I think they needed a breather. I think this is good for them. And I think in some ways it's a win-win for both of the teams.
Yeah, very good point. Quickly, we just going to make quick predictions. Game number 1, Kentucky versus Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's terrible. Give me Kentucky in that game. What you think, Riley?
I think Kentucky needs to use this game as an opportunity to really find out who their quarterback is. Vanderbilt is allowing 280 passing yards a game. Kentucky hasn't been able to throw the ball all year. So maybe get a lead and then try to start throwing on this defense with both quarterbacks, try to figure out something moving forward.
Okay, Arkansas versus Florida. That game will highlight Felipe Franks, the former starter quarterback, versus Florida. In that game, give me Florida in a close one, maybe 30-23, 30-20, a little bit closer game to what people think. What do you think, Riley?
Yeah, Felipe Franks has actually been pretty good this year. I know 2018 Mizzou pulled off a little upset of Florida, and I said I'd never be scared of a team with Felipe Franks at quarterback, but now I'm a little frightened of Arkansas. He's completing 67% of his passes, almost 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns to 3 picks. It's his homecoming. If they come motivated and ready to play, I think Florida definitely has holes, but they're playing really well right now, so it'll be tough.
Yep. And lastly in the game, South Carolina versus Ole Miss, kind of like a coin toss. I would say just give me Ole Miss. I feel like they really showed and flashed their potential in a close game against Alabama, like their kind of like their quarterback duo. They go through, I think, eventually going to next year specifically, they have to make a decision on who they're going to roll with full time. It's kind of weird having 2 quarterbacks like that. But give me Ole Miss in this game, very close to kind of go both.
Yeah, I think both of these teams, we saw Ole Miss play Alabama very closely. So we know that their ceiling is pretty high for where they are, even though they're 2-4. And we saw South Carolina beat Auburn. So I think both of these teams are better than their records. I expect it to be very close. But Ole Miss not really having a quarterback, it kind of makes me a little unsure of them closing out games. So I would take South Carolina in a very, very close one.
Yep. And the last segment we'll probably talk about today is really the improvement of the Arkansas football team. Arkansas has been terrible in the laughing stock of the SEC the past few years, but with the hiring of Sam Pittman and bringing in Felipe Franks, the former quarterback we just talked about, that was originally at Florida. This Arkansas team has completely turned their program around, even though they're only 3-3. The Arkansas fans will tell you 3-3 is a great improvement, especially in a year where they're just playing SEC programs and they're playing top-notch teams and talent week in and week out. So it's not a cupcake 3 wins. These are 3 wins that are legit. In a regular year, they might be sitting at 5-3, 6-3 at this moment in time. But I think really the biggest thing, biggest adjustment for Arkansas this year is Sam Pittman and his coaching staff has been able to convince their entire team to be all in. You saw a game last week, they were down 13-0 against Tennessee, and then they win the game 24-13. That speaks to that team going to halftime saying, hey, we feel like we're the better team. If we play and do what we need to do offensively and defensively, we will beat Tennessee, and have that mental fortitude to go and like the defense in that third quarter, holding Tennessee to only 16 yards. That's just phenomenal. The defense, to put in perspective how well the team has improved, they forced 15 turnovers in 6 games this year versus last year. They had 16 turnovers in 12 games. So they just had a complete turnaround. I'm really impressed what I've seen from them. Felipe Franks has learned how to not throw the ball to everyone and their grandmother. This year he's been able to protect the ball well and be an elite game manager. And I'm impressed, Rod. I don't know what you think about them.
Yeah, I think Arkansas. When you talk about the best first-year coaches in the SEC this year, Arkansas is right up there with their improvement. And I think what really makes or breaks their upset potential with some of these teams you might expect them to lose to is really the defense. You look at games that they've lost this year, they've given up 37, 30, 42. But then in the wins that they have, they're giving up 13, 21, and 14. So it seems like if they can keep a game low scoring, they have shown that they can grind it out. But whenever they start getting into a shootout, it's like you called Felipe Franks a game manager.
Yeah,
he really can manage the game. But if it's going to get into a shootout with a ton of points, they're probably not going to win, which is why Florida is not a great matchup for them. The defense will really have to step up if they want to keep it close.
Yep. But thank you for being a part of the first episode of Last Call. We'll be back Saturday night to recap the 3 games we talked about. Hopefully, maybe see an upset this week. But thank you for tuning in.